Hey guys, welcome back to the channel, where it's the best place to learn about Canadian finance. We're heading into September, and usually by the last quarter of every year, that's where we see the most real estate buy-sell activities going on. So with that in mind, in the next 3 to 4 weeks, I want to heavily cover the real estate topics and go everywhere from the market trend to the macro and the micro things you should be looking at when you're purchasing your principal property or investment property. Now for this week, I want to start off with the topic talking about how the Canadian real estate gets so expensive, what happened in the past 30 years, and also we'll be looking at a country that has been very efficiently solving their housing issues and see if we can learn something from them. I also think it's extremely important for us to know what happened in the past so that we can learn from it and get ready for what's about to come in the future. So without further ado, let's jump into today's video. So first, let's start by looking at when did real estate start ramping up in prices. Now, if we look at the graph on the screen for Vancouver and Toronto housing, we can really see that the price have started to ramp up at 2001. And this correlates to my childhood memory of us buying our first ever home, a duplex, for $390,000 at 1997. And I remember at that time, everybody was telling us that it was too expensive. But fast forward, when we sold it in 2007, we sold it for $700,000.
Well. How the turntables...
So we almost doubled the purchase price in just 10 years. And that was just the beginning of the housing price ramp up. Over the next 13 years, housing prices have doubled in all major cities in Canada. So the question is why? Why is this happening in 2001 and how come it's growing so rapidly? In my opinion, there are 5 factors that contributed to the housing price boom for the last 20 years. So let's get the first 2 obvious ones out of the way, and that is population growth and urbanization. As we can see on the chart that Canada have a pretty healthy and consistent population growth for the past 30 years. Now what was interesting was I realized that out of all the G7 countries, Canada have one of the highest population growth percentage-wise for the past 30 years, while we have the same or lower birth rate than the other G7 countries. So what that means is the majority of the growth for Canada actually comes from immigration. Now, before you say, hey, see, I knew immigration was the problem. They're the ones that are buying up all the houses and driving up the price. Bringing in more immigration, bringing in more hot money, it's gonna affect the housing price. We also have to remember that population growth is one of the most important factors we need to have if a country wants to sustain for long term. Because keep in mind, a healthy society is supposed to look like a pyramid, where there is a smaller number of the elderlies at the top, and there are a lot of working class and young people working, paying taxes to support the social care for the elder people so they could retire. And this shape should be kept like this all the time. But the reality is our society is more like an upside down triangle. So this is why Canada needs a constant population growth to support this system. And when the birth rate is very low, then immigration is very important to maintain that growth. In fact, looking at some articles published by the researchers, they're saying Canada should aim for 100 million in population in order to support the country's growth and social programs. Now, population alone is not enough to add to the housing market boom, because looking at our neighbor, US, with 10 times our population, their housing market problem is not as severe as Canada's. So this brings the second factor, which is urbanization. Urbanization is a common trend around the world. This is basically people just want to stay closer to cities, stay closer to their job because everything is so convenient. They're more incentivized to live in a rural area or live far away from the city. Now, the issue with urbanization in Canada is that the land is too much and there's too little people. So what happens is people are spread extremely thin, and it's very difficult to construct multiple cities with thriving economy. So because population is too low, what ends up happening are people are gathering together to form one major city, one mega city like Vancouver, Toronto, and Montreal. And as we can see from the data, every year for the population growth, almost 50% of the new population are going to these 3 major cities. So the first 2 factors create a scenario where more and more people are pouring into Canada, but they only want to concentrate and go to the top 3 to 4 major cities. And the next factor is where the housing price problem really started to develop for the last 30 years. So the third factor is supply of land. Now you might say, wait, what? Look at us, we have tons of land. While that's true, most of the land is actually not usable due to natural landscape or urban planning. So let's look at Toronto for example. It has something called the GREENBELT planning zone. On the wiki's explanation, GREENBELT is basically a policy and land use zone designation used in land use planning to retain area of largely undeveloped wild or agricultural land surrounding or neighboring urban areas. So long story short, there are restricted land that you cannot build on. While I agree it is important to retain land to make sure the urban expansion doesn't get too out of control, it did create an issue where Toronto is basically boxed in. So as you can see from the official map, the green belt is surrounding Toronto at every single direction. So as more and more people are pouring into Toronto, it needs to expand outward. It needs to expand to more land, but it can't because it's being boxed in. Looking at Vancouver, we see a similar things. Now, we don't have a green belt for Vancouver, but we also don't need one. So as you can see on the map, on the south we have the US border, on the west we have the sea, north there are mountains, so the only place to go is east. But I'm sure you'll know, all the major jobs are located to the west side, and if you live somewhere like Maple Ridge or Langley, it's going to be way too far for you to drive to the major source of work. So while you could expand to the east, a lot of people are unwilling to move there. So imagine this, population is growing every year in Canada. They all want specific location, but all these areas are boxed in either naturally or artificially. So when you have no more place to expand outward, the only option is to go up. So this is why while the house prices start booming up in 2001, it's also the same time where apartment and condos start getting built like crazy because people have no choice but to build upwards. Now looking at these three factors is not too bad because looking at our neighbor US, people do live quite far away and don't mind driving 1 to 1.5 hours to work. So we could do the same thing, right? Well, not exactly. This is where the fourth factor come in, is poor infrastructures. So if you live in Vancouver like me, you probably know how poor most of our road conditions are and how narrow all the roads are. Most of our highways, like the one going to Richmond, is just 2 lanes on each side, compounded by massive constructions or road maintenance. A lot of times our roads are down to 1 lane, and that's a lot of traffic jams. Also, our SkyTrain system is horrible. It shuts down all the time and the coverage is quite limited for most people. Bus schedule is usually quite far apart and again is plagued by the road condition issue. Now, I've been in Toronto and in my experience, the infrastructure is a lot better than Vancouver, but the same points still apply. It seems like urban planning is on a different page than the government, which is looking at the population growth. So the cities have outgrown the roads, and now people are very discouraged to live further away because getting to work is going to be very unreliable and it's going to be very time consuming. So what that creates is people are coming in, they want a specific place, but they're boxed in, so only place to go is up. So that's why apartments going up, house prices going up. People don't want to live further away because of poor infrastructure. And the last factor, which is lack of regulation. So this one is obvious, and I'm sure a lot of people agree. Since 2001, with the housing price boom, there has been little to no regulation, especially when it comes to rental units. Like I said in the previous video, rent is super important because it dictates how attractive an investment property is to an investor. But since not much have done on the rent control, rent have soared for the last 20 years. And because rent is increasing rapidly, that attracts more investors to come in, so more demand. And because demand is high, price is going to go up. And the new buyer who just paid a much higher price now needs to rent at a much higher price again to make the same percentage return as the previous buyers. So now rent is going to go up more. And when rent is going up even more investor comes in. And now it becomes a vicious cycle. And that's basically what happened for the last 20 years. And this is a huge issue because it's not just about having a place to live. It's also about satisfaction level of living in these cities. And as we can see, satisfaction level is at an all-time low because most people are very frustrated. They're working hard, they're paying tax, they're saving up, but no matter how hard they save, it's very difficult to catch up to the ever-increasing house price. So what does this mean? Does it mean that every single major city is going to go through the same thing, where house prices is going to get out of control and everyone will be forced to rent and feel frustrated and squeezed? Well, the answer is no. Let's look at a country that's done an extremely good job in solving their housing issue. Now, before we dive into this country's housing system, I would like to remind you that I have a private Facebook group called Get Smarter with Money. So if you want to get exclusive content or ask questions in this group, make sure you click the invite in the description below. And this country is Singapore. Now, before you put your hands up and say, hey, Singapore is super different from Canada, I understand. I know there's no way we can replicate exactly what Singapore is doing because of the political difference and cultural difference. But nevertheless, they are doing something that's very effective, and it's worthwhile to look at them and see if there's something we can learn from this. So let's look at how Singapore is able to create a very healthy housing economy. When I say healthy, I don't just mean home ownership is very high. I also mean when it comes to satisfaction level, it's 90% plus. So people are extremely happy with the government's housing plan in Singapore. So how did they do it? The answer is a very well-rounded and strict public housing plan. Now, when you hear the word public housing, you might be thinking about things like these very gross apartments. But actually in Singapore, public housing looks like this. These are the units we're spending 500 to 700k in Vancouver just for a one bedroom. So let's do a very quick recap of what happened in this country. In 1907, Singapore population has grown rapidly, quadrupled in 40 years. However, housing severely lagged behind, and it created a really bad situation. Most people were living in slums. By 1960, Singapore's first Prime Minister, Lee Kuan Yew, comes in and basically he kicked out all the housing committee and formed a new one called the Housing and Development Board, HDB, with a focus on providing affordable housing for all its residents. There was a big accidental fire that burned out a lot of the slums, but HDB acted very fast and built 50k apartments in 5 years. 400k people, which is about 25% of the population, are housed inside. This is how they started their public housing plan. Since then, a couple changes have been made to make the system even better. Number one, HDB have started selling their units to its residents. You can order the unit you like first, and then they will start building it. This is the exact same concept as a pre-sale. Number two, everyone in Singapore is forced to save for their house. Every month, their employer and they have to pay a portion of their salary to a fund called the Central Provident Fund. This is similar to our CPP, except they not only can use it for retirement, they can also take out their savings for their down payment. Number three, supply is limited to citizens with certain salary range. Depending on your salary, you can get anywhere from a basic 1 or 2 bedroom condo to anywhere like these luxurious condos if you're at the high salary bracket. All these are public housings and they're on average 20 to 30% cheaper than the private market. Number four, you can only sell after a 5-year live-in period. Number five, individuals can only own one unit at a time. And number six, foreigners can buy, but they would have to pay an extremely high duty fee if they want to purchase it. Under these rules, today, citizens in Singapore have rocketed their home ownership to 90% plus. So why does this work? Well, that's because the government have created a separate and controlled ecosystem for people looking to get their very first home. By forcing everyone to save, everybody could be a buyer. Demand and supply are also carefully controlled. At the same time, they allow you to resell your unit after 5 years at the market price. So you could still make a profit and use that to transition into a private market if that's what you want. On top of that, Singapore has an extremely good transportation infrastructure. So a lot of people don't mind living away from work because the subway system has been so efficient. And this is done because the government see real estate in Singapore as a place to live, not a place for investments. No wonder residents are so happy with the housing situation in Singapore. So this is what happens when the government is focused on getting its residents into their own home. And in Canada, the problem is not that the homeowners are being greedy for asking for a higher price, because of course they will ask for the highest price. If you have an asset, of course you want the most profit out of it. That's just basic human instinct. But the problem is we have only one ecosystem and everyone is in the private market. And due to a lack of regulation, or maybe it's simply not possible to regulate a private market, buyers are left with no choice, and that's where the majority of the frustration is coming from. They are stuck and they're forced to play in the same market. When you're brand new, you're coming in as a first-time homeowner, of course your resource is going to be much less than someone who have already been working or owning a home for the last 20 or 30 years. And now if you have to play with such a big discrepancy in terms of resource, no wonder you get frustrated or you feel hopeless about the housing market situation. So I'm not an urban planner or a city planner. I have no idea how we can solve this housing issue right now. But in my opinion, the very first step is government has to work extremely hard and maybe collaborate with developer by providing subsidy to build a lot of affordable housing for people. And they need to create a strict ecosystem on who can get into these housing and who cannot. They can further lower the price and the cost by making it a leasehold property, just like Singapore. And if there's too many people applying at the same time, they can use a similar system as Hong Kong, where it's like a draw system, it's a lottery system. At least that's more fair than pitting everyone into the same private market and try to compete with each other. Now, there has been talks and plans to build affordable rental and housing already from the government, so that's a good start. But I really hope that these are not just points to try to get yourself re-elected, but you're actually fully committed to provide affordable and sustainable housing space for new homeowners. Alright, so we looked at our housing problem and we looked at a country that's been doing very good with their housing issues. What do you think? Is there any takeaway we can learn from Singapore? If so, let me know in the comment below. If you like these videos, I do upload them every Tuesday, 8:30 EST. So make sure you comment, like, and subscribe to the channel. Click the bell button so you get all the videos in the future. Alright, this is Jacky. I hope you learned something today. I'll see you next Tuesday. Bye!